So, how many feet wide should the road be? We'll set it in the metric system. Of course, Kin Issei preemptively blocked other kinds of digging. He was truly an angel of the unit system. Originally, roads in this era generally didn't need to be that wide. How big can a cart be, and how much traffic could there be to necessitate a 12-lane road? About this wide. Not even close. It should be wide enough for 4 of Nemo's porters to pass side by side. But in our community, the situation is different. First, most of the carts are as big as a porter. More precisely, they're as wide as a porter. This is because the first roads in this community were naturally formed by hijits and porters passing through. The width of the road wasn't determined by the width of carriages. Rather, the width of carriages was determined by the width of the road. The second reason is a bit absurd. People saw the porter and thought it was cool, so many copied it. Surprisingly, this is true. Anyway, given these circumstances, we have to build roads based on the porter. So roughly matching the width of the porter at 10 feet. We'll go with 3 meters. The yardfoot system is cut. There are no heretics in our church, except those who use yardfoot pound. After condemning those evil pagans, everything became neat. Indeed, the metric system is divine. The width of the road was decided to be 12 meters. Some might think this is too wide for a road of this era, but I looked a bit ahead. I wanted this road to be used even when dozens of cars and carriages would pass through later. We can't lay a road connecting Chesapeake and Crotone from the beginning. After all, we need to connect with bridges before deciding whether to lay roads or not. For now, I want to focus on transportation near Chesapeake, a city that has grown considerably with a population in the tens of thousands. First, we plan to build roads along the coastal area extending west and north of Chesapeake, and lay a road connecting from Chesapeake Port to the heart of the city. Come to think of it, it's like Tokyo subway lines 2 in 1. Indeed, is Japan still my spiritual homeland? Anyway, we don't need to do anything grandiose like laying cement to pave roads. We're already busy building breakwaters, and it takes too much effort. As is common in rural areas, we finished paving by digging the ground a bit deeper and filling it with decomposed granite. This should be good enough for water drainage and smooth enough to not be uncomfortable for travel. A lot of sand and gravel come out from various places as we build mines. And this sand and gravel are either used directly for laying roads or go into concrete aggregate. By hardening concrete to make tetrapods, which will be loaded onto the soon-to-be-built salvage ship, they will immediately form a breakwater, and as waves are blocked, the road will advance again. On the other hand, after establishing mines, we promote the efficiency of the process just mentioned by running various ironworks, cement factories, and steamboats with the coal produced there. Everything is interconnected. Even those who were watching without joining a monastery saying things like manual labor is a bit willingly participate in such public works. And new immigrants who are initially bewildered join in because everyone else is doing it. The community seems to be running reasonably well. As we build cement factories and accumulate know-how on concrete pouring and curing, we'll probably be able to build large structures with concrete in the future. If I reveal the secret of the future artifact, reinforced concrete, everyone will react with amazement, saying, "What? The thermal expansion coefficient of rebar and concrete is identical. How could this be?" And be moved by me. Yes, everything is running smoothly, thanks to various future technologies and future knowledge. In fact, I haven't done much. Even when I vaguely mumble things like, "I think it might have been something like this," people proceed with the work on their own, and with surprising efficiency. No, I'm starting to get a feel for it. I'm beginning to understand how haphazard technological development and improvement can be. Isn't there a famous anecdote? The story of Edison trying 7,000 different filament materials over a year to find efficiency for the light bulb. If I were to compete with Edison, I would immediately look for bamboo charcoal to use as a filament, because I know that's the answer, or I might use tungsten right away. Moving with history as an answer key allows for rapid progress. In the world inside my head, in a world yet to come, people have already tried tens of thousands of times over hundreds of years. and the information about that answer key. Only I have a monopoly on it. Those educational comics, the books in the library, and even the detailed catalog of Immortal Kingdom can only be read and understood by me. Before the issue of right and wrong, I considered how widely the knowledge in one person's head could be utilized and change the world. There are great limitations to what a single person from the future can do. I am not an omnipotent genius. I cannot achieve results beyond the fragmentary knowledge I possess. Even if I alone learn future knowledge in a secret library, if I can't think of how to apply it, even the most useful knowledge and technology will be buried and disappear. I especially feel this point in this development project. What if I presented the screw-propelled ship to various shipwrights and requested continuous research? Would the development of a screw-propelled ship still be impossible? I can't do bigger things alone. It's impossible by myself. Our community has always been protected through technological superiority ahead of the outside world. Whether it's 21st century products I directly brought, or results made here with future knowledge. Lexan sheets, new muskets, war tractors, etc. Also, our community is maintained through that technological superiority. If our agriculture didn't have tractors, the entire industry of our community would probably collapse instantly. Such superiority has helped us stand here, overcoming the waves of history until now. We always need technological breakthroughs. We always need to stay ahead of others. Only then can we be safe. And if I can't guarantee such results by struggling alone, if this breakwater protecting the community now collapses under bigger waves someday, I reached a conclusion. Knowledge must be shared. This time, we'll change the model arrangement to a diagonal pattern and increase the amount of water poured to 20 liters. Is that acceptable? I've noted it all down. Proceed. Understood. What we're doing now is an experiment. In a wide tank with a slope, water is poured from one side, while on the opposite side, dozens of palm-sized small tetrapods have been dumped. We're conducting experiments to see how well the breakwater holds up depending on its arrangement and the direction and intensity of the waves. As Harriet nodded, strong men standing by on one side simultaneously removed a partition from the water-filled tank. Whoosh! And so, the breakwater, indeed, receiving the impact diagonally makes it much stronger in resistance. However, the load on the front section is too great. It remained intact. The reason we're all gathered here is quite simple. Because I'm not a civil engineering major. I don't have detailed future knowledge about breakwaters. But we can't cause a disaster by building a breakwater once and then saying, "Oh, we built this wrong? Let's demolish it and rebuild." Moreover, the sea environment has too many variables to account for theoretically. The ocean is a living, breathing entity of immense complexity. Blockages in one area might cause ruptures elsewhere, creating unexpected pressure points. Sudden changes in seawater flow could develop, altering currents that have remained stable for centuries. Even established shipping routes might be forced to change, disrupting trade networks that the colonial economy depends upon. The interconnectedness of marine systems demands careful consideration. So if you look over there, we're conducting experiments on a model that reasonably recreates the terrain features near Pamlico Sound. Anyway, playing with models and messing up is much cheaper than ruining a few seas and islands later. In any case, Harriet mumbled today as well, his brow furrowed in concentration, calculating where and with what density tetrapods should be stacked in each terrain. His fingers moved rapidly across his notes, jotting down figures and sketching arrangements with remarkable precision. Indeed, having one science person makes things so much easier. His mathematical mind bridges the gap between my vague future knowledge and practical implementation in ways I never could alone. After conducting experiments for a couple of hours, we finished with the breakwater issue and moved on to the ship model phase. We placed mini sailing ships and mini steamboats, of course. Since there was no way to miniaturize steam engines, we substituted with clockwork toys on the water tank and tested under what conditions they would break or slow down. And the test results. The efficiency seems worse than expected. Harriet looks at me with a dark expression. What's this? Why such a serious face suddenly? What do you mean, Mr. Harriet? Exactly as I said. This steamboat differs completely from existing ships in both the load it must bear and the problems it must solve. For example, look at that sailing ship model with the broken mast in strong winds. That sailing ship receives the burden of force on its sails and mast, from which the entire hull gains propulsion to move. I see. But the steamboat, that is, the paddle wheeler, is completely different. Did you see how it immediately slowed down when high waves hit? The paddle wheel is submerged too much in water, preventing proper efficiency. This means the design of the hull itself. Vaguely scientific talk, vaguely incomprehensible talk. Something complex continued. And from there I could extract one conclusion. Does that mean we need to completely rethink the steamboat design? Correct. Do you have an idea of how it should be redesigned? For now, it seems we need to conduct more varied experiments. That means he doesn't know. But I take back what I said about progressing quickly with future knowledge alone. I may know the answer, but knowing the answer doesn't always help. There was a reason Edison experimented thousands of times to find light bulb filament materials. In the end, technological development is about grinding and guessing. From now on, we'll use the Edison method. We'll keep trying until it works. Of course, I can't do it myself. I needed people who could do it for me. Fortunately, finding such people wasn't too difficult. Night school and mechanic school. 3 years after joining the Covenant, the schools created to meet the demand for knights and mechanics while the Alliance expanded have finally started producing something. Hundreds of people who have received some form of education. People who can read, have studied the basic operation of machines, and the fundamental mechanics I remember. We selected those who had been educated at each school over the past 3 years but hadn't decided on their post-graduation paths, particularly those with excellent grades. Basically, those with nimble minds that are still malleable. We gathered them and suddenly instructed them to design a steamboat. They were all understandably bewildered, but, well, thinking about it, there are no better candidates. In this in this world, they are the only ones who know the structure of steam engines and can work with them. Anyway, while conducting experiments with them and outlining the structure and overall design of the steamboat, it happened. Sir Nemo? Ah, Raleigh, you've come at just the right time. The students were just demonstrating their steamboat models one by one. Rather, something more important seems to have come up. What do you mean? Raleigh said, English exiles have arrived, and the exchange students have returned. Finally. Compiling information from various sources, if I were to summarize the situation in Britain most objectively and accurately, it would be this: it's a mess. After Elizabeth I passed away, England essentially became a power vacuum, and even James couldn't properly handle the chaos. Anti-James sentiment is boiling, with influential figures gathered in Liverpool forming their own parliament to oppose James. James can't even touch them. London is still held by rebels but is isolated and dying. Anyway, to explain in detail would just be complicated and chaotic. Suffice it to say that exiles who lost their safety guarantees after the Queen's death have flocked from various places. Sir Nemo, it's been so long. There were welcome faces like Shakespeare and other figures I had seen in textbooks which momentarily widened my eyes, but actually they weren't who I was truly happy to see. The aforementioned exchange students. It's literal. People sent to study in England. To explain about them, I need to go back to when I first started thinking about educational facilities. Someday, I want all the people of the Covenant to receive education. And naturally, it's impossible for me alone to devise a perfect curriculum and teach them perfectly. First, I needed scholars who could work with me on such a task. Also, I needed someone who had experienced systematic education in some way. Then, as it happened, Elizabeth discovered my identity, and not long after, I made a proposal to the Queen. How about sending exchange students from Virginia to famous English universities for smooth mutual exchange between the two countries? The Queen's courtiers influenced me through Raleigh by saying things like, I'm an Oxford graduate, and it was truly a beautiful place with excellent professors. Or, Compared to Cambridge, Oxford can hardly be called a university, a vibrant hall of learning, and so on. Anyway, the Queen gladly accepted. You must have had a hard time living in a foreign land for years. As always, Virginia welcomes you all. The exchange students I had sent then had returned. The bright young people I had carefully selected. Among them, I picked out a familiar-looking young man from Crotone and asked him, "Ambrose, how was your homeland? No, how was school? Was it satisfactory enough? Are you all right?" Then Ambrose hesitated, looked at me directly, and said, "Well, England seems to be hell after all. Equals. Ambrose Vicus was one of the 100 or so people who departed in 1587 to pioneer Sir Walter Raleigh's Virginia colony. More precisely, he was one of the 9 children among them. After the Roanoke colony ended in failure, he somehow mixed in with the group led by Eleanor Dare. And on Crotone Island, he lost consciousness on the verge of starvation. And, when he woke up, he was there. Thus, receiving his grace, Ambrose became a resident of Crotone. Since then, he has lived with pride in his heart. He is someone chosen by the Lord's messenger and saved from death. He had the duty and privilege to observe Sir Nemo's words and devote himself to his will. With such thoughts, when Sir Nemo assigned him the duty of vineyard keeper, he did his best, and when Sir Nemo taught him to read and write, he learned to the best of his ability. Then, Ambrose, how would you feel about studying abroad in England? It seemed like an opportunity had come to him. Ambrose, you are a bright young man. You might adapt well at Oxford. So he eagerly seized that opportunity. Of course, he didn't have high expectations for academics themselves. Blood generated in the heart perishes at the extremities of the body. This is from the heart. Sir Nemo had warned him not to expect much regarding the accuracy or interest of the knowledge to be learned there, and thanks to that, he could spend his time fairly productively studying theology and rhetoric, which Sir Nemo hadn't taught, without major disappointment. Of course, if that had been all, he might have attended school with satisfaction. Kill him. Wah! But the university students were closer to somewhere between beasts and humans than to people. Day in and day out, duels, alcohol, gambling, duels, alcohol, gambling, fighting among themselves, brawling outside, then fighting among themselves again. The professors were in similar straits, and the city, surrounded by all sorts of filth, was unclean and unpleasant. It wasn't an environment where one could learn something systematically and properly. It was also different from when Sir Nemo taught knowledge to others in Crotone. At the same time, students of high status, with their noses in the air for being university students, often bullied others. His daily routine sometimes became apologizing everywhere on behalf of friends who had destroyed various things in taverns. Why does something like the right to beg even exist in the first place? Anyway, in a word, in England, I never want to go back. Somehow, this is quite different from what I expected. If Elizabeth, who had intended to create pro-English figures through exchange students and solidify the alliance between the two countries, had seen this mess, she probably wouldn't have been pleased. Neither am I. No, education, institution? Is that right? What I expected from universities wasn't anything special. At the very least, I wanted the process of systematically teaching something to create talent with practical usefulness. But that was more like a club created by people gathered under the names of professors and students. Wait, come to think of it, community in Latin is universitas. University. It really is a club. Just in case, I asked others. How was Cambridge? It was truly an excellent place. That's a relief. At least this one seems to have been satisfied. Indeed, different for each person. I learned fraternity and courage while disciplining those who dared to tarnish our university's honor with guns and swords. No, he just over-adapted. Looking more closely, it was the difference between those who had received something close to education from me and had been actually deployed in some work like vineyard keeping and those who hadn't. In other words, the perspective of people who had experienced different kinds of education in life would be more accurate. Wondering if perhaps only England was like this, I sought out those who had been Spanish military commanders and asked them. The University of Bologna was a wonderful place. There I learned pride and honor. What did you major in? Medicine. There I taught lessons to many impudent fellows through duels. As expected, something's not right. Perhaps the concept of a university needs to be redefined. If we want to establish a proper educational institution, that might be necessary. I needed a space that would allow us to move beyond the current situation where I alone hide future knowledge and bestow it at the right time. A space where people can research, exchange ideas, teach posterity, and form an academic community and systematic educational environment was needed. Who will do that? I guess I have to do it. The universities of this era are, dens of thugs. Yes, that feeling seems closer than halls of learning. No, why on earth would they guarantee students the right to beg? I could understand establishing extraterritoriality as simply medieval. No, perhaps I'm being too prejudiced. Francis Bacon, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Isaac Newton, and so on. Aren't they all people who received university education in this era and became excellent scholars? And their achievements were published, exchanged, and spread to somehow influence many people, so in the end, universities must have fulfilled their role. It's not like Newton printed his writings himself and distributed pamphlets. Feeling the need to investigate more objectively, I asked the exchange students again. Everyone does as they please. Many don't even attend lectures properly because they're going to prison. I had a hard time continuously learning Latin grammar that I wasn't interested in. Even the professors there were less skilled at treating patients than I was. I tried to major in law. Although I've returned like this because England became chaotic midway, someday I want to earn a doctoral degree. From this, I could roughly see the system. At universities, they learn 7 basic subjects: grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy. From the description, it seems mixed with astrology, and music. This is called the trivium and quadrivium. After that, those who want more knowledge take advanced lectures on the trivium and quadrivium, then join the university community and qualify to become faculty. That's how people who teach knowledge at universities are reproduced. That's the liberal arts process and the path to earning a master's degree. That's right. There are no majors. A master's degree refers to a cultured person proficient in Latin, mathematics, astronomy, music, philosophy, etc., and qualified to teach others. It doesn't mean a specialist in a specific field. So to earn a degree in real majors like theology, law, or medicine, one must first study the trivium and quadrivium, then listen to the education from each faculty and earn a doctoral degree. After a master's, it's not a doctorate. Doctoral degrees only exist in theology, law, and medicine. Colleges are not single-subject universities but dormitories and student communities, and the classes there are separate from those at the university. Something is quite different from what I was thinking. First of all, it was my mistake to view the universities of this era as extensions of schools and educational facilities. The universities of this era are guilds, the kind of guilds that often appear when explaining the medieval period. Could we call them intellectual guilds? Thinking of it that way, it makes sense that they receive extraterritoriality, autonomy, begging rights, and various other privileges, because they're guilds, a community of knowledge where craftsmen, professors, gather to raise apprentices, students, among themselves and bestow craftsman qualifications, masters and doctoral degrees, among themselves. That's a university. Well, since technicians and specialists in this era are typically reproduced this way, these people can't be said to be special. Rather, from the perspective of the 17th century, where medieval traces remain quite present, it could be seen as rather ordinary. But that's not what I wanted. First of all, the system is quite advanced. If the pre-modern educational institution I had in mind was something like Sungkyunkwan, a national bureaucrat training institution, this place is at least free. The universities of this era are one of the few hubs where intellectuals gather and various knowledge accumulates. Tokyo Imperial University of Edo and Meiji is often compared to universities, But wasn't it the case that no academic research was actually done at Tokyo Imperial University? After all, Tokyo Imperial University wasn't an institution for such purposes. In contrast, European universities are literally free communities of knowledge. There, they actually produce new knowledge, spread it to other universities, and various intellectuals interact through the universities. By forming an academia in this way, they create opportunities for knowledge to develop and spread. That's what universities are. In that sense, in some ways, they are much more advanced than what I had in mind and touch upon the fundamentals of modern universities. However, the knowledge that comes out is ambiguous. From my perspective, there are still many problems. I just called European universities guilds. Then, how are guilds typically maintained? Of course, since guilds are associations of specific occupations, the basic thing is to pass on the skills for them to make a living among themselves. Additionally, they control nearby industries to obtain funds and secure the capital to maintain themselves. But what about universities? Learning Latin grammar doesn't produce bread. From the beginning, there are no majors except theology, law, and medicine. That means the purpose of universities is to cultivate cultured people, not professional education. So these cultured people gather to form a community, create knowledge, pass it on, all good. Then how is this maintained? Usually, of course, it's maintained by exploiting the parents of students. Exactly like 21st century humanities colleges. This feels somewhat familiar. Anyway, not everyone who comes to university is rich, and if there are students without money, they need to somehow secure tuition and textbooks, so rights like begging rights are guaranteed. Because students have no money. The same goes for professors. As mentioned earlier, Latin grammar doesn't bring in bread. Professors have to become private tutors for nobles or hustle in other ways. So it's good that there's a community of intellectuals. But they're poor. The reason is clear. It's not an educational institution that nurtures specialists like in modern times. A place where untitled noble children or wealthy commoners go to build connections and culture, and to gain the backing of a community that will become a political support in the future. That's what European university communities are now. Modern universities, even if not in engineering fields, respond to society's demands in some way. Whether humanities, social sciences, or natural sciences, fields that seem to have no direct relevance at first glance clearly contribute to society upon closer examination. But the universities of this era are not like that. Of course, they do train a small number of legal professionals and theologians according to the demands of rulers, but that's all. Since they didn't exist for productive purposes from the beginning, they're naturally short of money. Also, the knowledge that comes out isn't very practical. Only theology, law, and medicine, which have majors, might be exceptions. That was the limitation of universities in this era. While not entirely unrelated to modern universities, they differ qualitatively at various points. What I want is professional education. No, it doesn't end at simply educating professionals. We have night school and mechanic school, but they focus on practical education, so to make an analogy, they would be closer to the old Judicial Research and Training Institute than to law schools. We need an organization of professionals who truly produce knowledge. At the same time, an organization that continuously reproduces such professionals. Modern people call such an organization a university. And something similar in our community exists. It does. I slapped my cheeks once or twice and raised my head. This is our home in Crotone. A pretty cottage with a green roof that my mother, a big fan of and of Green Gables, put her heart and soul into building. My home, my farm, and I looked out the window. I see that structure which has been growing larger and larger since some time ago, now magnificently sparkling like some crystal palace. Those are our new houses made with Lexan sheets. They've all been connected and combined, resulting in that. And inside, Sir Nemo? Have you arrived? We tried crossbreeding the variety you mentioned last time, but the quality seems to have dropped significantly, so we're planning to discard it. There are vineyard keepers who manage the vineyards on this Crotone island. What about the other European grape varieties? Yes, we do have trees imported from France, as you mentioned, but weevils immediately attached themselves when we tried direct cutting. Since they have no resistance to pests, it seems we need to continue grafting. You experimented directly, without my specific instructions.
Pardon.
Nothing. This vineyard of millions of square meters on this island that I've put my heart and soul into cultivating. The preservation, collection, and improvement of seeds taking place all over it. Sir Nemo, I had been unnecessarily looking for models from afar, when an exemplary case was right in front of me. Grapes are Virginia community's main export. A kind of symbol, you might say, starting with Shine Muscat, which first caused a huge sensation in England. Varieties like Ruby Roman and Black Sapphire continue to perform well. If we consider not just fresh grapes but also products processed from grapes such as raisins and wine, their position becomes even more solid. If the grape crop were to suddenly disappear from this community, our community might immediately fall into great confusion and economic depression. Especially, our connection to the Christian world was significant. Among Christians, there are those who venerate saints, those who avoid decorating church chapels, those who recognize priests, and those who don't. But one thing is the same for all. They use wine in ceremonies. There are many debates about whether wine turns into Jesus' blood during sacraments or not, whether only priests should drink wine or if ordinary believers should too. But if you ask, so you're not going to use wine? No one would deny it. Moreover, in Europe during this era, clean drinking water was scarce, so low-alcohol wine or beer was sometimes drunk instead of water. That's right. You could say wine is the sake of the Christian world. A very sacred one at that. Even if grapes don't sell, wine will inevitably continue to sell. That's the structure. Therefore, grapes will likely continue to be on our list of major exports as long as Christianity isn't uprooted in Europe. But of course, people generally eat what they're used to eating and drink what they're used to drinking. If it's a product from across the sea, shipping costs are added, so they'll tend to avoid it if possible. So we need to continuously differentiate. It's essential to maintain quality consistently and maintain the brand so that similar products don't dare to emerge. Ugh, my head. The painful memory of some good-for-nothing bastards making watery Shine Muscat and causing comments like, "Isn't Shine Muscat a short-lived fad?" Or "Shine Muscat tastes like crap these days" is. Thus, the Shine Muscat boom collapsed like a bubble in an instant, and those guys probably ran away saying, "What? I thought it made good money, but it's nothing special." They would have just lost some money and that's it. Compared to that, the pain that our Kin Issei farm had to endure for years after the Shine Muscat trend ended. Teeth grinding. Sir Nemo? What's the matter? Nothing at all. Ah, just thinking about it makes my teeth grind. My body tremble with chills, and my hands and feet shake. Anyway, such things shouldn't happen. Having come this far, Kin Issei Farm's grapes should be eternal. The tragedy of tearfully distributing free grapes to people around and filling one's stomach with Shine Muscat for 3 days and nights should not return. The blood and sweat of another poor grape farmer should not turn into a pile of debt again. Cannot be. Absolutely cannot be. Deep breath. Let's calm down. No, I've been stabbed and burned here, so why are those kinds of memories the most traumatic? Anyway, the grape varieties of our farm are continuously managed. At first, I taught them, but now they are grafting trees on their own and experimenting with how different trees grow in different soils and climates. Not just in Croton. Such experimental farms are established far north in the Wabanaki Confederacy's land and far south in the Diocese of Florida. They gather here periodically with data, new varieties, and research results from various places to improve our grapes. Then, aren't these people experts? Isn't this academia? As far as I know, yes. I've already nurtured a group of experts under the name of Vineyard Keepers. Then, everyone. As I open my mouth with gravity, everyone looks at me in silence. I smiled brightly at them and said, "How about training the next generation now?" A nameless alliance casually called the Continental Covenant. Its influence, connected by a dense trade network, stretched widely from Florida in the south to the Arctic Circle far north. That vast domain acknowledged Nemo's supremacy. Even counting just the various countries that had formally joined the covenant, its sphere of influence was already larger than England and France combined. A newly established country, rapid expansion, a war just recently, and sudden encounters with foreign peoples. Despite all these factors, a university. If I establish an agricultural university, would I be the first? What next? Things had decreased to the point where Kin Issei could have such idle thoughts. To be precise, there was less for Kin Issei to be involved in. Particularly beneficial was the Virginia community's recent steady economic expansion. There was the effect of improving the trade balance with Europe as various consumer goods became self-sufficient. On the other hand, the Virginia community's dependence on Kin Issei also greatly diminished. For example, with the spread of reverberatory furnace and crucible methods in iron and steel production, there was no longer any reason to transport iron materials from Kin Issei's farm every day. With the exception of various regular medications and medical supplies, Lexan sheets, and aluminum, there were virtually no essential resources among those Kin Issei provided to the community. Even medical supplies like alcohol and purified water were already being manufactured at medical centers everywhere, and aluminum was mainly used as a luxury item for trade, so it didn't have a major impact on community operations. On the military front too, research continued to find flint mines to replace Kin Issei's lighter components used in flintlock muskets, and to consider various materials to substitute for Lexan sheets. Of course, the community still needed Kin Issei as the spiritual pillar and political focal point of the community, and as a catalyst for the religious fervor leading the community to prosperity. But the community no longer depended on Kin Issei. Kin Issei took this as a positive sign. After all, it meant the community was becoming healthier. Now I can use these surplus resources here? Instead, Kin Issei began to think of other things. Resources that had to be distributed in all directions were gathered in one place again. So now it might be good to embark on more ambitious endeavors. I thought extensive civil engineering would be needed on Croton Island after a long time, but surprisingly, there was no need to build a magnificent building. There was already space for storing seeds and experimenting with various varieties. There was also a lounge where vineyard keepers stayed while working, and spaces for vineyard keepers from various regions to gather and hold meetings had been prepared for a long time. All I had to do was rename these spaces as laboratory, dormitory, and lecture hall. Of course, we did start building campus buildings. A Renaissance-style university building finished with red bricks, giving a solemn impression, was in the design stage. But what's important is that even without building structures, we could break ground on the work. It meant the framework of the knowledge community was already established. The vineyard keepers were already sharing knowledge among themselves and delving deeper into more profound knowledge through each other's research results. So what I needed to do was just to provide direction so they could teach future generations. First, our university will also teach some Latin, mathematics, and classics. Grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music, the 7 liberal arts of the medieval period. It's a collection of 7 disciplines that could be considered education for free people. Some of these are still useful and necessary even today. First, grammar. That is, Latin, which still exerts influence as an international academic language, must naturally be known to interact with European scholars. For the same reason, classical textbooks used as logic and rhetoric materials also needed to be taught. As for mathematics, represented by arithmetic and geometry, its importance goes without saying. In the end, only astronomy and music were excluded. Even if not music, astronomy of this era is intertwined with astrology, so there's no particular need to teach it. Since there's no middle or high school in this era, this level of basic academics had to be taught here. Thus, with essential liberal arts established, it was time to move on to the next step. Living in Croton and taking on a role was considered highly honorable by the people of this community. As such, numerous applicants flocked to the news of building a new agricultural university, and this was even before recruitment started. Everyone was puzzled that a university would cultivate agricultural scholars, rather than doctors or theologians. Of course, that wasn't the only difference from existing universities. You're granting doctoral degrees? That's right, after earning a master's degree first. From now on, master's and doctoral degrees are not separate, distinct concepts. It still means the same that a master's degree is for those who meet the minimum conditions to work as faculty. But now, even masters will have a major in agricultural science. And if someone who became a master proves that they can now create knowledge independently as a researcher, they could become a doctor. It was exactly like the academic system of the 21st century that I knew. The reason for this change was that I had changed the purpose of the university itself. Now, a university is not an institution for cultivating aristocratic, cultured individuals. It will nurture specialists who can create knowledge through their own research and enable them to teach others knowledge so they can create specialists like themselves. That was the essence of the university I would create. College of Engineering. Do you mean you'll nurture mechanics? At a university. That's correct. At the university. And in creating such a university, I wasn't satisfied with just one agricultural college. The night school and mechanic school were merely institutions for educating practitioners. The quantity and depth of knowledge they taught were far from enough to build a proper think tank. Hence, an engineering college was needed. Combining the knowledge of an average Japanese who had completed high school education with the knowledge of knights and mechanics working in the field, we could somehow complete something resembling a curriculum. Adding to that philosophy, linguistics, natural sciences, and theology colleges with the help of exiles from England, we could finally establish a university that would seem sufficiently cultured even to people of this era. The most important thing was to establish the structure. The path for students to learn specialized knowledge, acquire the capacity to become educators, and finally accumulate enough learning to become researchers. Paving such a path was my goal. The blueprints for the colleges of agriculture and engineering were drawn in that way. Other colleges like philosophy and linguistics were also taking shape, thanks to prestigious exiles from England. Thanks to them, the comprehensive university should be well-rounded. The vineyard keepers bustled about, running east and west, saying they were less worried about successors, and people murmured with curiosity about the identity of the university that an angel was going to build directly on their island. And this is not enough. I realized this couldn't be all. Why was the knowledge taught in medieval universities so impractical? It's because it was a space to fill the culture of free people. So I changed it to a space for cultivating specialists. But is that all? No. Running for the sake of culture simply means running for honor and self-satisfaction. Even with patronage, it was for someone else's honor or intellectual pleasure, not for society's needs. So even in medieval universities, studies or technologies that could practically enhance society's industrial capabilities didn't develop. Rather, academic development followed someone's intellectual pleasure or, at best, political necessity. Remember modern society. Those numerous research institutes and the research conducted there didn't run automatically on their own. Most significantly, the state leads the direction. It conducts national projects, sponsors various related research, and ensures they can help national power. I can do the same. No, I've been doing so all along. Because I requested it, the vineyard keepers worked so hard to preserve various varieties and attempted to improve seeds. I can lead technological development in areas that interest me. However, I can't be interested in all fields. That's the same for modern nation-states. The world is too large and complex for someone to adjust and move the direction of scholarship one by one. I lived in a capitalist society. And in the society I lived in, the role of reflecting such social demands on scholarship was taken by corporations. I decided, designing the academic system and curricula for each discipline is not all I need to do. I temporarily left Croton Island. And, nameless one, how did you come to such a place? Nice to meet you. Are you the abbot of this monastery? Let's get inside first. I visited the industrial monastery in Chesapeake. There was only one tractor factory in Chesapeake. The largest factory in Chesapeake, built at Nemo's request to various craftsmen. Other factories lined up around it were also places that supplied various parts, materials, and tools to the central tractor factory. This could be called Virginia's first heavy industry complex. As such, among these factories, several modest yet dignified fortress-like buildings were situated, all of which were monasteries. When Nemo, who entered through them, reached the largest tractor monastery, someone directly opened the monastery door to welcome him. "Nice to meet you. Are you the abbot of this monastery? Let's get inside first." The man was quite flustered. He didn't know Nemo would suddenly visit this place without prior notice. This was a monastery with a structure similar to European ones, consisting of communal housing and dining facilities for monastic order members. Nemo looked around slowly as if to observe it, and others gathered in crowds, bustling to have an audience with Nemo. Of course, the similarity to European monastic orders was only in this outward appearance. The monastics here were mixed without regard to gender, and many were married. Although they lived somewhat ascetically and regularly, they still fell short compared to European monasteries. However, as they were continuing communal living, which was rare among Virginia's monastic orders, this could be said to be relatively close to the original form of a monastic order. The man guided Nemo to a reception room and handed him a simple drink. Taking advantage of the moment Nemo drank it, the man sorted out his complicated thoughts. "I have a proposal for the abbot of the Tractor Monastery." And Nemo speaks. The man bowed his head and answered, "No, a proposal, you say? Whatever you command. If I call some workers and say that you personally requested something, everyone will work hard to—" "No, this must be a proposal." The confused abbot briefly looked at Kin Issei's face, then tilts his head and asks, "What is it that makes you say so?" Then Kin Issei speaks again. "This should not be accomplished by my individual commands, because this must be something accomplished by your strength and will. It should not be something that ceases without the command of a high person, but something that you must continuously accomplish by your own will." "What is it?" To the abbot's question, Kin Issei answered, "For the monastery, for the monastic order to grow larger and stronger, it seems anyone should be able to participate in the work without difficulty." It was a monastic order for him. Isn't this Virginia's monastic order created to allow everyone to enjoy sacred daily life through labor? Therefore, for the monastic order's influence to become more powerful, higher levels of mechanization and division of labor must accompany it. Of course, the Tractor Monastic Order is mostly a respected organization, because those who take on difficult and specialized work are gathered. However, as the specialization of that work increases, the actual influence of the monastic order becomes limited. So Kin Issei proposed, "The soon-to-be-established College of Engineering will help you. Consult with the factory owners. Then the university would fulfill their expansion desires. For the leaders of the monastic order, an opportunity to spread this pious and holy labor more widely. For factory owners, it would guarantee larger factories and more profits. Then, yes, request that the university help with your business." Thus, the first research request arrives for a university that hasn't even been established yet. A university connected to industrial monastic orders, pursuing more practical scholarship. It wasn't just science and engineering disciplines at Croton University that pursued such aims. In this era, and especially in the newly structured Continental Covenant, law, theology, philosophy, and political science could also be sufficiently practical. Regarding what Thomas Aquinas said in the Summa Theologica, Calvin said this: "Today, let's discuss this proposition." Especially in theology, since the nameless church didn't have particularly sophisticated doctrines, lectures continued comparing doctrines of each denomination, even including those of Islam and Judaism. As the Catholic Church refined its doctrines through the Council of Trent, critical differences in the doctrine of the communion of saints. In the Lutheran Church, there are also accusations that Calvinists have doctrines similar to Islam. It could be seen as content similar to the more modern comparative religious studies. And this is the current situation in England. However, this is an era where barely 100 years have passed since the Reformation. The doctrines and relationships of each denomination were constantly alive and changing. Naturally, consideration of modern political and religious situations was inevitable. Therefore, the content taught in the theology college naturally included extensive information about current European affairs. There, a professor from England who had fled to the Covenant to escape chaos said, "Now, in England, the atmosphere is ominous whether among Catholics or Protestants. England's Catholics were gradually taking the path of radicalization after persecution, and the Protestant side was also gradually becoming extreme due to the aftermath of a war that ended ambiguously and meanly despite numerous victories. Gradually. We don't yet know how the intensification of their relationship will lead England's politics where, and how it will shake the religious fervor of all Europe. However, hostility toward each other is increasingly deepening." The professor, who had experienced terrorism by Catholics, spoke with a trembling voice. "All of Europe seems about to explode soon. People desire things that are rarer, nobler, and greater than what others have. Common things cannot satisfy people. People yearned for things that had become even rarer in this new world, this new country. Here, Christian ethics, which had long been familiar to them or had shocked them anew, worked decisively. They desired honor, and at the same time yearned for salvation. They revered frugality, aspired to diligence, and hoped to be of help to the community of the great angel. What is that person doing now? Oh, angel, that person is now practicing an ascetic life, extremely reducing his food intake. That would make it difficult to maintain health due to lack of strength. While it's his freedom to do so, what use is there besides physical suffering? Pardon." Meanwhile, the angel leading the community did not seem to prefer unnecessary asceticism. So even among ascetic practices, it had to be more necessary. For example, making more things for others of better quality and cheaper. The community quickly responded to Kin Issei's opinion. People realized what the angel they respected demanded. He wants something that actually helps the world. Not personal moral cultivation achieved by just staring at a wall. Silence, abstinence, restraint, perhaps these were not so meaningful, unless they served a greater good of helping their families, neighbors, and ultimately all of humanity. Thus, industrial monastic orders were born. It was the result of following human nature that prefers things rarer, nobler, and greater. A religious enthusiasm and excitement about building the world together with the holy angel pervades the entire community. Gathering people for the monastic orders was quite easy. However, most naturally, humans crave comfort. If one can live abundantly without doing anything else, forcing such a person into laborious work is not so easy. Currently, those directly or indirectly participating in the monastic order movement constitute about 30 to 40% of Virginia's population. This might seem like a large number, but it also means that the remaining 60 to 70% are living idly on what the agricultural knight order and the rest of the population earn. They don't particularly prefer to contribute to the community beyond donating a small portion of their property to public works or doing occasional volunteer work. They don't feel the need to do so. More bluntly, they find it bothersome. The angel doesn't force or pressure them either, and since they remain faithful in their religious life, society simply leaves them to lead a comfortable life. After all, the community is already sufficiently wealthy with the supplies produced by the current factories and monastic orders. But from the perspective of individual factories and monastic orders, this was not so welcome, because it blocked their paramount goal of business expansion. From their perspective, markets are expanding across various regions. The Diocese of Florida has proven over the past few years that it can serve as a massive consumer market in itself. Similarly, the Wabanaki Confederacy, which would have originally appeared in the late 17th century, was formed decades earlier, and at a much larger scale than in original history, to enjoy the benefits of joint membership. At the same time, the Iroquois Confederacy and the Shawnee tribe, which joined the alliance alongside them, were also incorporated into the alliance's economic system with populations exceeding hundreds of thousands. To bring well-plowed fields with tractors to all of them, to establish strongholds of the Knight Order and churches across that vast domain to incorporate them, tremendous resources and labor were needed. In this situation, where tens or hundreds of thousands of people depended on products from the community, the factories and monastic orders couldn't help but feel that the currently idle workforce was being wasted. They wanted more people to participate in labor. It was economically desirable for everyone, and morally right as well. They sought a way to attract the many who had quit working due to lack of manual dexterity or simply because they were content with the current state. In the midst of this, Qin Issei connected universities with factories. The tractor factory and its monastic order were the first to move. The next to move were the various subcontracting parts factories under them. Next, various miscellaneous factories and monastic orders physically close to those parts factories participated. In the parts production process, here, the part where metal is cut away consumes too much time. As a result, the overall parts production volume is low, so please improve it. Such direct orders regarding productivity could be interpreted like this, depending on the perspective. During parts production, the metal cutting work requires too much skill, making it difficult to assign to others besides a few specialized monastics. Please make it easier and simpler. Issues of accessibility and expertise. In fact, since most factories and monastic orders were desperate to attract more personnel, it was inevitable that various problems converged to these two issues. For the metal cutting problem, why not try imitating the lathe that the nameless one previously distributed to jewelers? Wouldn't that make the work somewhat easier? To this, the faculty of the university, which had not yet properly established buildings, presented alternatives one by one. Of course, many failed and many were difficult to implement in the field. Even though professors were selected from among craftsmen, they couldn't be proficient in all fields. But their research sometimes provided groundbreaking turning points. There's a reason why technological development in pre-modern times was so slow. Humans live by inertia, and society is maintained with such inertia. Technicians can make a living by working as they always have, and children can accept their parents' techniques without any changes and still get by. That's what pre-modern technicians are. And rapid development both advances and destroys society. This is clear when considering why so many guilds thriving in the medieval period were so zealous in maintaining technical levels and controlling production quantities. But the factories and monastic orders of the community had no society to protect. It had been just a few years since the Continental Covenant was established, and not even a generation had passed since a proper government was established in Virginia. They had only two principles to uphold: more goods to more people, nobler labor to more people. Besides these, they had nothing else to protect. Therefore, they could follow the advice from the university without any resistance. It was thanks to this that the proportion of participants in the monastic order movement, originally maintained at around 30 to 40%, increased by about 10% during that time. Those who couldn't participate in collective labor due to poor manual dexterity were able to join. Though just 10%, it represented tens of thousands of labor force at the same time. It was enough for numerous new factories to emerge and numerous new monastic orders to be established. And soon, factory owners and abbots began to tilt their heads in wonder. Clearly, with more labor invested, their influence had expanded. But the upward trend was beyond what they had expected. No one knew the exact reason. It seemed that something profound was changing in the community. In the 21st century, the early modern period of the 16th and 17th centuries is often thought of as the twilight of religion. In conclusion, this is half right. Certainly, with the 16th century Reformation, the power of Catholicism was broken, and after the large-scale religious wars of the 17th century, religion never re-emerged as a force driving society as a whole. But thinking in reverse, the situation changes. The fact that the Reformation ignited fires all over Europe, and almost all European countries participated in wars caused by religion, proves the piety and devotion of that era. People zealously went on pilgrimages and were passionate about donations and charity. They actively hunted Jews, witches, and other pagans. They were enthusiastic about purchasing indulgences. Monasteries were filled with those wanting to become monks or nuns. The 16th and 17th century Europe was an era dominated by religious fervor, just like other eras before it. But why? Why did not just one or two people, not just the upper class, but tens of millions of people pray to heaven with such enthusiasm? For hundreds of years, at that. There can be several answers, but the following fact must have played a major role. There was nothing else in life to be enthusiastic about. Except religion. All holidays and festivals were connected to religious annual events. The tens of millions of people who struggled to make a living poured their life energy into such annual events and became more attached to religion. The life that the absolute majority of people lived on Earth was too mean to care about, and there wasn't much that changed even if they cared. Therefore, paying attention to the eternal glory of heaven was a more economical choice. People didn't think that their yesterday and today and tomorrow would be different, but they believed that they could get closer to infinite glory every day in their heavenly life. Perhaps the cynical atheists of the future were right. When theaters become more plentiful near home, when money pouches become more plentiful, and when hope is discovered in life, people won't look for hope in heaven. When there's a way to make a living, when there's a path to rise, naturally people become indifferent to life beyond. Such a story applied similarly to the people of the Virginia community. Ah, hello, Nameless One. Nameless One. Please look this way. Of course, they didn't become indifferent to religion. The evidence of heaven walking clearly before their eyes prevents that. The angel who gave them a new life and homeland showed them all too clearly why they should believe in and follow Christianity. However, their lives had become too splendid for them to focus only on heaven. For the first time in their lives, they were able to fully satisfy their desires. At first, they were obsessed with wrapping themselves in layers of fur, decorating their clothes with jewels, and building larger houses. They spent lavishly on luxury with whatever came in. Surprised by the wealth they first held, they indulged only in enjoying it. They ate, drank, and enjoyed precious food. But as mentioned earlier, common things cannot satisfy people. When wealth became common, wealth too became something one could tire of. Some who tired of wealth entered monastic orders for honor and spiritual elevation, but others had different thoughts. They had lived immersed in religion until now, and they had learned how to enjoy a new life after coming here. Though tired of enjoying wealth, they didn't want to throw themselves into religion as before. They had already enjoyed too much for that. There, Taryn? How are your sons doing? Why ask about my sons? You're getting older now. You should think about your children's future. That's true. I'm teaching them enough to inherit the factory work. Is that all? You need to look further ahead. Taryn, a Welshman who had transformed from an ordinary carpenter to a proper factory owner, was in the same situation. While enjoying a luxurious life, raking in massive amounts of money, he suddenly fell into thought after receiving such a question during a conversation with neighboring friends. What to do with his children? Then what about after you're gone? You should think about your family line. The friend who spoke like that had recently been participating actively in monastic order activities, sending all his children to university, and living diligently. As money accumulated, he invested it all in his children's education. At the words telling him, who had been just an ordinary carpenter, to care about his family line, Taryn felt a sense of dissonance but unconsciously nodded and said, "Yes, I should pay attention to that now." After saying that and returning home, his heart was inexplicably pounding. Taryn decided to send his children to university and simultaneously began reducing the frequency of the lavish banquets he had been hosting. Similarly, he reduced the number of luxury items in the house and made the dishes served at feasts more modest. At first, his family was perplexed by his change, but they all thought it was for the best and went along with it. It was because he had become more energetic in all matters. Taryn took the portion he had been spending on luxury and added it to expand the scale of the new factory being built. To send his children to university, he attached retired knights and technicians as home tutors. He devoted more time to work, reducing the time he indulged in luxury and pleasure. As if work itself was the purpose. Taryn himself didn't clearly know the reason. What had made him change? Then what about after you're gone? He only vaguely knew that his friend's words had been some kind of catalyst. After me, a legacy that won't end with my death. Wealth, permanence, wealth and glory that continues even after death. but not of heaven, rather repeating on this earth. Not just Terran, many moved like him. Without even recognizing the gradual change themselves, they gradually reduced luxury. And some built new factories. Some established new monastic orders. Some sent their children to university. They had begun reinvestment in earnest. Toward their businesses, toward their lives. They educated their children, ran factories, and steadily tried to grow the money coming in. They sought for this wealth to continue beyond their lives, passing to their children, and then to their children's children. They had learned to be honest with their desires. Without even recognizing the gradual change themselves, they gradually reduced luxury. Perhaps they made the same choice as when they were immersed in religion. Having achieved most of what could be achieved on earth, they dreamed of eternal glory and power. They sought for this wealth to continue beyond their lives, passing to their children, and then to their children's children. More wealth, more glory. Momentarily forgetting Jesus' words about storing treasures in heaven, they began to firmly gather their treasures on earth. 4 years after planning large-scale construction following the Queen's death, Virginia had just built steamboats, breakwaters, paved roads, and universities, but perhaps this change was greater than all those. Perhaps, if someone from the 21st century came to see, they might call it this, the seed of the spirit of capitalism. And the bloody year of 1618 arrived. It's been nearly 30 years since the angel descended to this land. The population of the Virginia community has easily surpassed 300,000, and nameless faction churches and night strongholds are being established throughout North America. The large-scale construction connecting Croton Island to the mainland is in its final stages, and several steamships have appeared, traveling along the east coast of North America. Of course, communication between the Continental Covenant and Europe is still handled by clippers. And the clipper sailors who returned with news from Europe received a summons from an exalted person. They approached him with tension. Following the road from Chesapeake southward and crossing several bridges, the Holy Land comes into view. The captain and navigator briefly kneel and pray before the boundary marker of the Holy Land, then continue forward. To the green-roofed mansion. There the Nameless One was waiting. They gazed nervously at the angel tending to grapes in the house. The captain and navigator swallowed, feeling their lips go dry. As the community's population grew, the angel who had once been as familiar as a neighbor to the people was gradually becoming a harder-to-meet presence. These sailors, too, had only recently joined the community. The feeling they had toward the angel was closer to reverence than familiarity. They looked up at the celestial being, and his mouth opened. Was there any particular news from Europe? At his casual greeting, the captain stepped forward and spoke. What do you mean by particular news? Exactly what I said. Please tell me if there was any major news. The captain tilted his head at the somewhat vague question, then spoke as if remembering something. Ah, they say the Sultan of the Turks has changed. A nephew overthrew his uncle. Nothing else. Pardon. The captain was momentarily confused when what he thought was mere small talk was met with another question. The angel gave him no time to think and continued. For example, news of a new war breaking out somewhere. Such news I haven't heard due to my limited knowledge. I apologize. No need. After saying that, the angel looked out the window and spoke somewhat cryptically. History seems to have changed. The sailors couldn't understand the meaning of those words. Only Kin Issei himself knew what his words meant. July 1618. It was about time that some news should have arrived via Britain. The descriptions of historical events listed in the catalogue had been greatly simplified, but the major events still had years and names listed. That was enough. The year when a war that would turn all of Europe bloody should have begun. The time when the 30 Years' War should have started had already passed. Kin Issei closed his eyes quietly, falling into deep thought. Has history changed? Or has it merely been postponed? The Habsburg family's power dominates all of Europe. They control the Holy Roman Empire in the German region and Spain, extending their influence toward Italy. The Habsburgs are the protectors of Catholicism and the guardians of the entire European world. Of course, they dispute with the Papal States over hegemony in Italy and within the empire. But ultimately, they stand in a position to protect Europe from the Ottoman Empire by uniting Catholic countries. And the medium of that unity is the Pope. Imperial authority cannot stand without papal authority. As much as the relationship with the Papal States and the Catholic faith fluctuated according to the emperor's political ambitions and beliefs, they were nonetheless inseparably linked to Catholicism. They were the center of Europe. They were the rulers of Europe. However, there are elements that could threaten them. Poland-Lithuania to the east doesn't need immediate attention. The south of Italy is just small, unremarkable states. Denmark-Norway to the north and Sweden are Lutheran followers. France's Henry IV is Catholic in name only, putting Protestants in various positions. He seeks to reduce the Catholic Church's influence within his kingdom. The mere fact that they are Protestants or protect Protestants is not the problem in itself. They are targeting the Habsburgs. They want something beyond their station. Or so many in the family think. Well, that's half right. The man acknowledged. Not all Protestants are targeting the mighty Habsburgs. But even so, the intentions of Protestants are always impure. They don't even try to hide that impurity. Why does the House of Wittelsbach follow Lutheranism? They want to crack the imperial authority protected by papal authority. But they don't want to be free from imperial interference. They want to become emperors themselves. They seek to seize the imperial throne that has been monopolized by the Habsburgs for 3 centuries. And why do the Bohemians follow the teachings of Jan Hus, who has been dead for nearly 200 years? Do each and every Bohemian peasant really understand Hus's teachings so well? No. They want autonomy and further, essentially an independent kingdom. Breaking the rule of the Holy Roman Empire, they hope to claim a larger share. And those nobles only dream of becoming kings of that new kingdom. The sweetness of power was making them devout Hussites. The conversions of various lords and kings were ultimately about standing at the very top of the church. For example, Elizabeth of England taxes the clergy, stops their charity work, and then passes poor relief laws as if doing a favor. She takes what belongs to the church and makes it part of herself. Protestant monarchs try to tolerate no foreign bodies within their territories. What kingdoms built that way would look like? He found it difficult to imagine. It was unlikely, but if a Lutheran emperor were truly born, what would happen to the empire? How would the imperial throne, which began when Pope Leo III crowned the great Carolus, continue without a pope? It was as difficult to imagine as a human body without bones. A country stands solely by the power of its monarch. Like the light of a fixed star, radiating from within, all people kneel under the monarch's authority and obey it. Even the clergy are no exception. Such a country, such a monarch, such a church. He couldn't understand. No, there wasn't even a need to understand. It was an ideal he could never reach anyway. That was their ideal. They wanted to crack this world. If one of their demands was met, another would arise. Their greed had no end. They knew no satisfaction. They converted precisely because they could not be satisfied in the first place. But that makes them useful, because the man himself was one who knew no satisfaction. Knock, knock, knock. Your Majesty, it's time for your duties. At the knocking sound, he rises from his seat and moves with the assistance of various attendants. Until very recently, the Holy Roman Empire was under the rule of an incompetent and foolish older brother. Rudolf II made politically foolish choices, persecuted Protestants, and performed poorly in the war against the Ottomans. However, the man who commanded the war against the Ottomans on the front lines proved his competence. And the man subtly left room for dialogue with the persecuted Protestants. They immediately became the man's allies and rebelled against Rudolf II. Thus, Your Majesty, open the door. I need to go to the office. The man, Matthias von Habsburg, became Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. His health is deteriorating, and he ascended to the throne rather late in life, but it is a position he fought for nonetheless. His brother Rudolf, who abdicated the throne, died recently in despair, so now he is the sole ruler of the empire. He sits with dignity and coughs dryly. Various officials in colorful attire bring different reports. He reads the reports and sighs with relief. The siege of Aachen is finished. Both sides have calmed down now. Yes, Your Majesty. Both Wolfgang Wilhelm and John Sigismund are showing a forward-looking attitude in negotiations. The princes were divided into two factions due to the previous emperor's incompetence and dogmatism. The Protestant Union, Protestantisch Union, organized against Rudolf II's Catholic oppression. The Catholic League, Katholisch Liga, formed in opposition to it. The Protestant Union had rebelled against Rudolf II and Crown Matthias, but they wanted too much. They wanted to restructure the imperial diet. They wanted the right to freely establish Protestant churches and worship in Austria and Hungary. The price was an oath of allegiance. Matthias was angered by their attitude of using the oath of allegiance as a bargaining chip, and the Protestant Union prepared its army. As the crisis of war approached, Matthias stepped back and accepted their conditions. Yet they demanded even more. Just last year, 1613, when an Ottoman invasion seemed imminent, the Protestant Union demanded a ban on the persecution of Protestants within Catholic princes' territories and a restructuring of the imperial judicial system in exchange for participation, indicating that they would not provide any support for the war against the Ottomans if these weren't accepted. This time, the Catholic League fully supported Matthias. Although the war with the Ottomans never materialized, Matthias now owed a debt to the Catholic League. Thus, while Matthias constantly stressed religious reconciliation and appeasement to prevent conflict between the two forces, it was merely a stopgap measure. He himself knew this. Just when peace seemed to have arrived, war broke out again. Wolfgang Wilhelm, Count Palatine of Neuburg, and John Sigismund, Elector of Brandenburg, both Lutherans, fought over the ownership of the Jülich-Klevesburg territory. This time, Wolfgang Wilhelm converted to Catholicism to gain support from the Catholic League in Spain, while John Sigismund relied on the Protestant Union and the Netherlands. Another large-scale war was about to unfold. Good. Aachen has fallen, and both are forward-looking in negotiations. Once again, it's barely being patched together. Matthias puts down the documents, feeling extreme exhaustion. Endless wars breaking out, being patched up, breaking out again, being patched up again. It's tiresome. How long can this continue? Another report is delivered. News that Frederick V, Elector of the Palatinate, has made radical statements somewhere again. Then, another report follows. In Bohemia, I dozed off. Where was I? Memory isn't coming back easily. The emperor is old. He's growing increasingly senile. The emperor falls back asleep and wakes repeatedly, caught in waves of drowsiness. More reports pile up on top of reports on top of reports. Those who want to swallow more struggle desperately. They rage endlessly, trying to devour the churches, communities, and entire societies within their territories. They act as if they cannot be satisfied without tearing apart what is above them and devouring what is below them. What can fill these hungry beasts? In his dreamlike state, the emperor sees something. He sees fierce beasts that devour everything. He sees an omen. That beast was growing from the British Isles. Finally, supplies from the New World are being received more stably. James leaned back in his chair with relief. He knew well that these supplies sent by Virginia, no, the Continental Covenant, were gestures for maintaining the alliance. From a political perspective, each one was a debt. But at least it was a kind of debt that could be repaid. A debt with a very generous interest rate. Look at France. How many benefits did that king receive just for checking Spain? The emperor of the New World gave definite compensation to those who benefited him. He smiled contentedly as he watched servants telling him how much of various grapes, furs, and aluminum had arrived this time. Of course, that abominable Walter Raleigh would still remain in the emperor's court. The queen's favorite, essentially the queen's male courtesan. But if he knows how to separate public and private matters, he will follow the emperor's interests. Scotland is already smaller and poorer than England. The land is barren, and the population difference is more than fivefold. Moreover, due to geographical barriers, political power is more scattered. James is completely fed up with the challenges from various great lords and clan chiefs. Without the resources sent by the Continental Covenant, he couldn't subdue the unruly Scottish lords. And if he couldn't subdue those lords, then I cannot claim England. He is officially the King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland. However, due to the Queen's machinations, he couldn't even set foot in Ireland, and the claim to the French throne is just an ancient legend. And England, James's brow furrowed. England, his teeth grinded whenever he thought of it. His gaze turned southward. Equals. How old are you? 15 years old. 15. Just the right age to take responsibility for your destiny. Robert grinned and patted his son Oliver's cheek. Then he said, I'm not sure if this old man will last more than 5 years. If I last 5 years, you'll be 20. What will you do then? I would have finished university by then. I'll marry to take responsibility for the family. Yes, good idea. And if I die before that? Oliver didn't resent his father for the mischievous question. His father was that kind of person, and he himself had become accustomed to such a father. So Oliver answered in a matter-of-fact tone. I'll quit university or whatever. Why? Because you're sad about my death? No. Then, I'll quit to gain experience. Going to Lincoln's Inn might not be bad either. Experience? How about cultivating the family fortune? What's wrong? I also know why you're unwelcome in Liverpool now, father. Oliver spoke as if stating that 1 + 1 = 2, as a matter of fact. Isn't it because your wealth and reputation are insignificant? What? Cultivating the family fortune doesn't seem very meaningful. Instead, I'll move around Liverpool and inherit your network. Oliver knew what kind of person his father was. He waited for a moment and then, ha! He slightly curled his lips as he felt Robert heartily patting his back. Overall, he maintained a calm, expressionless face. Correct answer. Yes, the future is here. Robert proudly continued patting his son's back. Then he pulled back the curtain to show his son the view outside. A rather large official-looking building, unsuitable for a small fishing village, was being constructed. This is now the center of England, the place where the Queen's footsteps had touched, therefore symbolizing the sanctity and greatness of pure England. The final fortress preventing that foreign king from manipulating this country at will. The northern parts of England close to Scotland are complying with King James's rule, but the vast majority of the territory is essentially not recognizing James and running autonomously. This is the center of that autonomy. London is dead. It's been over 10 years since the Queen left. During that time, London's population has plummeted to below 100,000. James lacks the capacity to intervene in London, and these Liverpool faction members are wary of the issue of the English throne arising the moment they reclaim London, resulting in neglect. As a result, the royal authority symbolized by London has become useless in England. The Queen's grand coronation celebration and elegant banquets at Whitehall Palace have all been forgotten. Now, their newly crafted parliament governs most of England, roughly, creakingly, but definitely. De facto, having just ended a massive war with Spain, there wasn't much they could do. Neither Scotland's James nor this self-proclaimed parliament. Everyone remembers when Spanish warships raided every coast, turning them into wastelands, and almost all maritime transport not going through Virginia's clippers was cut off. Now they were all essentially bankrupt. The splendor enjoyed during the Queen's era had all dissipated, so no one could guarantee. It remained uncertain who would gain hegemony among the King of Scotland, ambitious gentlemen, and haughty nobles. Therefore, rather than immediately starting a bloody war to kill traitors or tyrants, they filled their arsenals and prepared for tomorrow's confrontation. Yes, the future is here. The two Cromwells looked up at that temporary parliament building, envisioning tomorrow's victory. Meanwhile, freedom of faith is coming. Rome's teachings will return to this land again. Some whispered, Others shouted. They proclaimed days that would purify England again, which had been corrupted during the Queen's long reign. They were organized. Guy Fawkes, your supporters have gathered. Excellent. They gathered to create terror, to make Spain wage war again with this immoral country and support the revival of the Roman Catholic Church. A conspiracy with the smell of gunpowder, iron, and blood was being plotted. For the future reign of His Holiness the Pope in this land. Pope Paul V reflected on the past days. Since 1517, everything seemed like a crisis. Every step taken by the Holy Church seemed like one of the predetermined stages of doom. It was obvious that the Mediterranean Sea embracing Italy, once the cradle of wealth and abundance, was gradually becoming the periphery of the world, giving way to the Atlantic. Now the world's wealth came from the Western Sea. Also, the heirs of Peter were becoming laughingstocks in England, France, the Empire, and various other lands. No, being laughingstocks would be fortunate compared to the actual situation. Just decades ago, the flames of heresy rose like wildfire in southern France, and the whole of Germany surged with the wave of Protestantism. Poland and Hungary, Sweden and Denmark, England and Scotland swayed and fell. Monarchs who seemed most devout each mounted the wave of apostasy with their own schemes. The Christian world was torn to shreds. It had been so for 100 years, since those northern barbarians began shouting the cursed names of Luther and Calvin. Since those devilish doctrines began to spread. Rome, where the holy will of the chief apostle resided, seemed on the verge of collapse. At least until just a few decades ago. Until parts of France, the Netherlands and Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Poland returned to the embrace of the Holy Catholic Church. Decades. It took easily decades for the Holy Catholic Church to climb back from the pit of predetermined defeat. Pope Paul V, successor to the chief apostle and Pope of Rome, trembled as he recalled standing atop that holy and majestic journey. He had endured years of humiliation. Many popes had restored Rome's fallen honor by enduring pious and ascetic lives. The Lord's saints stood on much more sophisticated doctrine than before. The Lord's priests were protected within a much more solidly structured organization than before. He, as the Lord's representative, enjoyed firmer authority than ever. Decades of tireless reforms and struggles had made the Holy Catholic Church much more pious, upright, and passionate than before. Rome became more splendid during his reign. During his reign, France remained a Catholic country at least nominally, and the empire's bishops still wielded influence. Rather, aren't those heretics who acted as if they would conquer the world growing more subdued day by day? Your Holiness, the Emperor's request. Your Holiness, the envoy who came from Japan is now returning via America. Meanwhile, the influence of the Holy Catholic Church was extending day by day to America, Asia, and Africa. They were winning in China, the Philippines, and Congo. He thought with conviction. Someday hundreds of millions would bow under the Pope. All would kneel under the holy name of the Lord. Only victory remained. Britain seems chaotic. Indeed, such chaos must fill lands dominated by heretical doctrines. Truly so. But isn't it fortunate that loyal believers bring us such news? Of course, it doesn't matter. Chaos is opportunity. Paul V quickly gave several instructions to those around him, then hurriedly went to his designated place when it was time for prayer and knelt before a cross adorned with pearls and gold. And he reminded himself again. Yes, chaos is opportunity. Those who will seize that opportunity are the heirs who have inherited Peter's keys. In his hand was a letter sent by Guy Fawkes. The Pope smiled as he opened it. He believed only the Lord of all would triumph. Not only he, but all the gamblers gathered at the table of the European world with their cards believed so. They didn't know what catastrophe awaited before that victory. In Europe, before the flames of war erupted, ominous haze and the scent of burning were already rising. Everyone expected war to break out somewhere, but honestly, no one gave much thought to the scale or brutality of that war. They merely salivated over the spoils they would claim after victory. The glory of victory. Glory to be etched in history. Glory that would continue even after their death. While pursuing such things, and Throughout the Continental Covenant, efforts to maintain wealth and glory beyond one's lifetime were emerging. It's been 30 years since the Virginia community was established. Many apostles who once boasted of their youth have now entered middle or old age, and even John White has passed away. Now, when the babies of the Roanoke colony would have become 30-year-old adults. Now, when those 30-year-olds would have turned 60 and become surrounded by grandchildren. For some, it was time to think beyond the end of their lives. As the wealthy who had just awakened to their desires tried to manage wealth that would pass to their children and bloodlines. Do you have any pound notes? No. Gold coins are what we can't find these days. When it came down to it, they had no way to accumulate that wealth. The most intuitive means to accumulate wealth is, of course, currency. Especially as England fell into chaos recently, exiles and immigrants who fled brought their assets to the Continental Covenant's territory. Most of their assets were gold items, particularly gold coins. Due to the advantage of being relatively small and light compared to their value, precious metals were always the first assets that migrants secured. Add to that the small gold and silver coins that previous immigrants had brought in bundles. Such foreign currencies were the first assets targeted by wealthy people looking to accumulate wealth. But their quantities were limited. It was natural since there weren't many channels for pound notes or lever notes to enter the Union aside from what immigrants brought in bundles. So the value of foreign currencies skyrocketed. The various coins, already few in number, soon moved beyond the options available to factory owners and abbots. After all, one needs to be able to obtain something before even thinking about it, right? And the next thing that caught people's attention was something that was not limited in quantity, lasted a long time, and like gold coins, allowed wealth to be preserved in a compact form. Hey, what is it? How many Othello pieces do you have? Othello currency. To Kin Issei, they were merely game pieces, neither coins nor anything else, but currency is something that runs on credit. And since they were originally created to be exchanged for high-value lever gold coins, the value of Othello currency was easily guaranteed by that alone. Plus the symbolism of coming from the angel's mansion. Everyone collecting Othello pieces had expectations. The belief that the value of Othello currency would be preserved by celestial authority, and that these Othello pieces couldn't even be duplicated. In fact, these weren't just beliefs but certain facts. Since Othello pieces came from Kin Issei exchanging lever to French merchants, their value was certain. Also, the fact that they were made with 21st century technology, making counterfeiting impossible, caught everyone's attention. But that alone wasn't enough. There probably wouldn't be anxiety about the value of Othello decreasing just by holding on to them. Such anxiety didn't exist. However, it also seemed unlikely that the value of Othello would increase just by holding on to them. As much as there was no anxiety, there was also no visible hope. Virginia's wealthy needed something that would maintain its value, or rather increase in value, even after their lifetime. They needed items that could be passed from themselves to their children, and then from their children to their grandchildren, gradually increasing in value. This whiskey has been distilled in the Wild Chicken area near Pamlico Bay for about 10 years, so they considered various options. When we cut down nearby oak trees to make barrels for aging whiskey, surprisingly, it produces a sweet yet spicy aroma. Meanwhile, they consistently enjoyed the luxuries they had been enjoying: eating, drinking, wearing, and displaying. Also, isn't this whiskey something the angel has been seeking lately, and others are looking for as well? Moreover, with the name bourbon attached to it, it's being handled not only in Virginia but also in France, Florida, and various other countries. Oh ho! Then one day, they turned their eyes away from the distance and looked around their homes. They turned their attention to the things they ate, drank, wore, and displayed. First, I must express my sincere gratitude for visiting our liquor store. I must also say it's extremely fortunate. Currently, many people are ordering our bourbon whiskey. What's in this bottle is the last. How much is it? Well, I can pay any amount within the limit of my Othello chips deposited at the Chesapeake Central Market. Seemed quite good. So they began to turn their eyes to collectibles. First, it was whiskey. It was a field that people hadn't extensively explored yet, and it was also rapidly growing as trade with France opened up. Of course, it was a trend that emerged as Henry IV, bitten by Oytoten, reluctantly sold bourbon as a royal drink, but thanks to the strange and interesting flavor of Virginian whiskey, that trend continued to spread without dying down for years. This way, wouldn't the value of that whiskey be reasonably maintained even after I die? It didn't take long for people's thoughts to reach this point. Soon, whiskey at liquor stores everywhere sold out, and then people began to raid distilleries, buying up entire barrels of whiskey still in the aging process. This news gradually reached Taran, a Welsh Virginian who had been a carpenter, then a shop owner, and now a factory owner. Among whiskeys, the King of France is buying up lots of those with a sweet taste. So if I buy a few barrels of similar tasting whiskey and age them for a while, won't I profit just by sitting around? Oh! And Taran was easily influenced. When he scraped together all the money he had and didn't have, it amounted to quite a sum. With the appearance of a big spender, the Scottish employees at the distillery treated him like a king, though he had been just an ordinary carpenter until a few years ago, which made him splurge even more. He immediately joined several clubs and frequented several bars, starting to accumulate information about whiskey. Here, accumulating information about whiskey meant to success. To success. Drinking. Of course, that wasn't all. Taran saw various bars springing up around the Scottish settlement of Glen Angel, which had been an empty field just a few months ago. He also saw whiskey enthusiasts wandering around the area, and the Scots of Glen Angel building inns next to the distillery. They soon widely opened the distillery for visitors to tour, and bought small steamships to make it easier for guests to come and go in the area. Benefiting from all these processes, Taran happily drank whiskey, went on distillery tours, and observed the process of making the whiskey he collected. What Taran experienced was just part of the innovation process in the whiskey industry where money suddenly flowed in. As time passed and much money gathered, people finally began to focus on the work of pricing whiskey. There's a very strong scent of pepper, mild vanilla, and cherry. Mild vanilla scent? It's inferior. Ugh. There's a fishy sea smell here. Discard it immediately. Collectors soon began to distinguish which whiskies were delicious and rare, and which were tasteless and ordinary. At first, it was simply a matter of highly valuing scents that people generally liked and avoiding scents that people generally disliked. But now that a single bottle of whiskey had become a valuable investment, that wasn't enough. Tiny differences frequently resulted in price differences of one Othello chip. And enthusiasts gladly paid that money for these tiny differences, enjoying both the flavor of the liquor and the price differential. People emerged who professionally appraised the taste of dozens of whiskeys and set their value. They too grasped a considerable share of money. Thank you for inviting me. Do you drink whiskey here too? Haha, yes. I hope the ambassador enjoys it too. Yuck. It's poor quality with too strong a pungent scent. Drink this instead. It has a very deep apple aroma. In this way, the strict and delicate taste standards formed in Virginia were immediately re-exported and spread to the European continent through Oytoten. In Scotland, Ireland, England, and France and its neighboring countries, they consumed Virginia's whiskey. More and more people enjoyed whiskey over time, and Taran's expectations rose accordingly. I wonder how much the price of the whiskey in the barrels I bought has jumped. Surely, since they cost about 3 Othello when I bought them, when I sell them, they should be at least 11 Othello. 2.4 Othello. I can't value it higher than that. What did you say? The ones aged the following year have much more intense flavor and distinctive aroma, so the price of this year's whiskey has generally dropped quite a bit. Nonsense. Don't talk nonsense. Arf. Anyway, not everyone can profit from investments. As bubbles inflated, burst, and revived repeatedly, the whiskey industry grew larger and larger. Besides this, numerous people spent lavishly on various collectibles. Some invested in paintings and various artworks. This was the choice of those who keenly spotted that people gradually needed decorative items as they expanded their first homes. Some collected camping equipment and related crafts. These were people who noticed that many people were enjoying camping leisurely, following the taste of the nameless one who enjoyed camping. Some set their sights on the somewhat traditional field of jewelry and precious metals. Mainly English exiles poured funds into this area, having realized that the residents here, many of gentlemanly origin, aspired to more aristocratic and splendid fields. Thus, in each field, changes similar to those in the whiskey industry began to occur. Related gatherings and organizations emerged, producers engaged in more active investment and business expansion, and stricter and more detailed evaluation criteria and standards developed for those products. As gorgeous luxury arose everywhere, the mansions of the wealthy became increasingly splendid and bustling. Mansions that weren't too large because they couldn't increase the number of employees much, since no one particularly wanted to serve others personally, but splendid mansions. In the display cabinets of those mansions were numerous paintings, crafts, whiskeys, and wines. The value of each of these items fluctuated but continued to rise. These items would likely maintain their value even after their owners died. These seemingly modest yet bold desires gathered. Ambitions for wealth and power that would continue even after their death gathered. Hopes grew for wealth that would increase rather than diminish with the passage of time. Nemo, is it all right for such luxury to be widely spread?
Pardon.
Many monasteries are loosening their ascetic disciplines, and drinking and merrymaking are prevalent everywhere. It's fine. And Qin Issei said about this, I like it when people are joyful and happy. Although I wasn't well versed in history, after living in this era for about 30 years, I roughly knew what had happened in Europe over the past few centuries. For example, decades ago, the city of Zurich, ruled by Calvin, was governed by ascetic and pious, yet very strict and boring regulations. Whenever some people, especially pious Puritans like Hewitt, asked if luxury should be regulated, I often imagined Zurich of that era. No matter how much I thought about it, it didn't suit me, who had lived in a secular modern society. I had no intention of creating such a society. To be precise, I don't have the capacity to do so either. I'm not saying I'm not an important person in this community. It's not that I don't have the power, nor that I don't have the capacity. Rather, it's because this society operates in a way that seems somewhat peculiar to my eyes. To explain in more detail, this society operates completely differently from the East Asian society I'm familiar with. Everyone views other worlds and societies based on the world around them and the society they belong to. The same goes for Japanese people. Not just Japaneses, but East Asians consider societies where the state defines everything as familiar. So when looking at other societies, they often distort them to fit their familiar framework. For example, when viewing the fact that in pre-modern Europe, the church took on some functions of the state, Japanese tend to conveniently think, the church belonged to the state and took on part of its duties. But the reality is completely different. The church does not belong to the state. The church exists separately from the state. The state merely outsourced certain tasks to the church. The same applies when looking at educational institutions. Institutions like the Shohizaka Academy in Edo, Japan, and the Imperial Academy in Ming, China were state organs that trained talents for those states. When Edo, Japan, and Ming, China perished, the Shohizaka Academy and the Imperial Academy disappeared. However, Oxford University and Cambridge University are not under the English Kingdom. They exist independently from the English Kingdom, like mitochondria, which wriggle inside cells but live with their own independent DNA. In that sense, our society might be seen as resembling European rather than East Asian societies. The Agricultural Knight Brigade, the Nameless Church, the Virginia Trading Company, recently renamed the Federal Trading Company, and the Navy that shares ships with it, and so on. The various groups and associations that make up our society were formed among themselves. These weren't created with me formally establishing some system. Rather than organs within a single state, they should be seen more as different organisms in a symbiotic relationship. The Agricultural Knight Brigade, responsible for producing and distributing agricultural products in our society, may look like an organization under the Virginia government, but in fact they operate on their own. They are merely cooperating with the Virginia government. and the Federal Trading Company, which exclusively trades those agricultural products and various goods with Britain and distributes the profits, is also only loosely allied with the government. Just as Demodex mites living on human skin eat sebum and distribute acidic substances to block bacteria, but aren't part of the human body. Just like that, our community is not a single organism. It's not a structure where the government commands each organ as the brain commands each body part. When the Night Brigade produces agricultural products, the trading company sells and distributes them, and the government eliminates potential conflicts related to distribution. When the trading company lays groundwork by spreading multi-level marketing to tribes in all directions, the church expands nearby, and similarly, the Night Brigade ultimately settles and cultivates the surrounding area. When the government wages war, it sends requests to each association. Then the trading company donates ships to the Navy, and the Agricultural Night Brigade modifies tractors for warfare to protect the community. Rather than a single organism, it might be closer to an ecosystem. Naturally, an ecosystem doesn't have a single brain. It doesn't have a single ruler. I am not the head of this society. I am merely someone who weeds and prunes this garden. The appearance of this garden won't be the same forever. Just as the forest seasons change, leaves fall, and different wildflowers grow, the Agricultural Night Brigade will someday look different from now. How long will the free distribution of 25 hectares of land continue? Perhaps the day will come when the Virginia government first imposes taxes on its members. No one knows how long the spiritual and social enthusiasm of members will last. Who knows if the industrial monastery will always maintain its current form? Like all societies, this one will change. Over decades, centuries. During that time, I will watch and help. Today, too, people evaluate premium wines and whiskeys and gather artworks. I watch them. I haven't particularly intervened, because it looked good. Pope Paul V slowly opened the seal on a letter from an ambitious man and read its contents line by line. As he approached 70 years of age, he struggled to read the tiny script mixed with crude ciphers. Only after a considerable time, among the hateful bloodlines of the House of Stuart, there are those who are Catholic or sympathetic to Catholicism. The Lord has not yet abandoned this land. If we carefully select and place someone among them who has not forgotten the Lord's teachings, it will not be long before we rebuild the Holy Church in this cursed land. Also, I trust that Your Holiness will keep this in mind and make an excellent decision as the Father of the Church, Papa. Thereby. With that, I, Guido, the Italian form of the name Guy, a faithful servant of the Lord, send this letter. The Pope could grasp the general content of the letter. This letter, transmitted through Spain back to Rome, clearly contained important information. A plot against James I, King of England and Scotland. Paul V felt uneasy just holding this letter. The very fact that this letter had reached his hands essentially proved that the political propaganda circulating within Britain was partially true. That the Pope was plotting rebellion by using Catholics within Britain. That Catholics were traitors communicating with Spain. That Catholicism was trying to undermine England and Scotland from behind. Of course, such a thing was impossible. This was due to the bloody purges and march of apostasy that continued throughout Elizabeth's long reign. Perhaps 30 or 40 years ago it might have been different, but now the devil's teachings had already taken root everywhere. The Queen had secured public support through successive victories in battle and various political achievements, eliminating even the slightest possibility for Catholicism to revive. The popes had to swallow their resentment at this fact. So such a thing was impossible. More precisely, it had been impossible. Now it might be possible. Thinking this, Paul V threw the letter into the furnace. Treat the faithful who brought this generously, and bring him before me shortly after. I wish to bestow glory upon him. But, Your Holiness, should we not send a reply to that letter? I will not send one for now. One must be cautious. It was unclear how many Catholics remained in England, whether enough remained to exert influence at all. In such a situation, without knowing the strength of the faction led by this Guy Fawkes, if they rashly lent support and failed, the aftermath would be devastating. Certainly, according to the peace treaty with Spain, England had agreed to stop persecuting Catholics, but what if the Pope himself was implicated in treason? It was obvious that even the nominal end to persecution would become completely meaningless. The Pope quietly summoned Guy Fawkes's subordinate and offered all manner of lavish and sweet words of praise. He only uttered words without any substantial commitment. Rome would support Guy Fawkes and the Catholics in Britain, but only after they achieved some visible results, like changing the king. Well, that wasn't the most urgent matter anyway. First, he had to consider other issues. Your Holiness, contact with the Japanese envoy visiting Nueva España has been lost. What is? It seems they may have been swept away by storms common in that area. We must somehow track them. Issues like this, for example. Paul V suppressed a sigh and nodded. The regret was great. Was it a mistake to keep him longer than planned, by a year or two, to enhance the Church's authority? Was he overreacting to the turmoil in England and the offensive from Protestants? If only he hadn't kept that envoy at the papal court for so long, such an unfortunate situation wouldn't have occurred. Why did that important ship have to suffer such unfortunate shipwreck? Wasn't this an opportunity to establish communication with tens of thousands of faithful in Japan and take a more aggressive stance on Asian missions? How could? Sigh. Moreover, recent news from the East was also gloomy. There was news that an edict expelling missionaries and prohibiting Catholicism had been issued in Japan. Mortals dare not know how the Lord's holy history will unfold. Perhaps Japan is still too early to enter the Lord's embrace. Paul V could only offer prayers. In the 17th century, when Europeans were expanding toward the oceans and building true world history in the genuine sense, Europeans often thought they could illuminate all the unknown parts of the world and conquer all seas and lands. Furl the sails. Quickly. But the world was still vast, and the realm that humans could govern was only a tiny fraction. From the ocean's perspective, even a fairly sizable ocean-going vessel was like a tiny grain of sand placed before a child. Something that would fly away lightly if blown upon. And when the sea briefly exhaled its rough breath as a storm, Lord, please protect us. Please just save. Saints, if I return, I'll donate all my fortune to the Church. Please let me return alive. The ship instantly lost its way and scattered like ants blown by the wind. The vessel that was supposed to head to Hispaniola Island had now completely lost its way. They clung to the mast and rigging that bent like a bow about to break, and tied themselves down, shaking all over, to avoid being blown away by the wind. They bailed out the water coming into the ship while staggering, and tried somehow to maintain visibility despite the whitish spray. Of course, it was in vain. With a cracking sound, the mast finally broke, and the sailors sensed death. They wept amid the fiercely howling storm while offering prayers that would likely be their last. By now, even the sun beyond the clouds had sunk below the horizon, making it a dark night. They lurched about in darkness where neither moon nor stars were properly visible. And thud! In the impact felt throughout their bodies, most of the sailors and passengers could not withstand it and collapsed. They didn't even know where they were. After a long while, when they regained consciousness, the ship was lodged on a sandy beach. We're alive. We're alive. Thank you, Lord. As dawn broke, they realized they had survived from the jaws of death and wept with joy. Still staggering as if not believing it, missionary Luis Sotelo spoke to a man who had been holed up in the cabin. Mr. Haskra, we've survived. Good heavens, it's land. The man, also looking dumbfounded, slowly emerged from the cabin and looked around. Before his eyes were a white beach, vegetation beyond it, exotic trees, and fruits scattered here and there. Luis, do you know where this place is? I don't know yet, but some people are searching the nearby coast to confirm, so we'll have an answer soon. Isn't saving our lives more important than anything else? Well, I suppose so. The man tidied his official attire and followed the other sailors off the ship. Looking back, the vessel they had come on had a broken mast and was twisted in many places, already beyond sailing without repairs. Seeing that condition, The joy of survival faded from Luis Sotelo and the man's minds, and practical concerns began to emerge. Where on earth was this place? An island? A continent? Various parts of America were already dominated by Spain, so if this was a land touched by the light of civilization, they would soon be rescued and could return to their original destination. But what if this was a deserted island? Or worse, what if it was a place inhabited by the cannibals they had only heard about? Or even if not, what if it was a land full of hostile barbarians? In that case, far from escape, they would have to worry about survival here. As these thoughts reached them, the man and Sotelo felt chills down their spines. They prayed that this would be a land ruled by Christians. And look, the reconnaissance team is returning. Run away. Everyone run away. Their wish was granted in a direction they did not want. There, a steel carriage, a monster. The faces of those who heard these words froze. They knew exactly what it meant. Especially since most of the people here were Spanish, they couldn't help but know. This was Florida. It was indeed a land ruled by Christians. Soon soldiers swarmed in and surrounded them. This is a land ruled by a barbarian monarch, where the teachings of wicked apostates and heretics prevail. According to rumors I've heard, the slaves here worship some angel? It's terrible. They say they control fearsome machines that instantly destroyed our soldiers. I saw that machine. Good heavens, we're all dead men now. While the Spaniards, who had landed in enemy territory, trembled in fear, he too helplessly watched the soldiers pointing guns at them. He had heard the rumors that to the northeast of Nueva España spread an empire of heretics, and its emperor cooperated with other heretics of the European continent to threaten faithful nations, including Spain. That a strange and terrifying heresy among heresies ruled this land. That they should be careful of them. Looking far away, he could see something like an outpost. They seemed to have been discovered from there and come running. Tiresome Spanish devils. Have you invaded again? Drop your weapons or we'll kill you. Everyone drop your weapons. When soldiers from the outpost shouted loudly, people quickly lost the will to resist and dropped their weapons. Especially those who claimed to have seen some iron carriage or whatever it was dropped their weapons first. They had already completely lost their fighting spirit. The rest also gave up resistance one by one, seeing dozens of well-armed enemy soldiers rushing in from nearby. It was an astonishingly quick response. As dawn broke and the ship was spotted, soldiers who had been standing by in the vicinity rushed in to surround them. Columns of smoke rising from all around seemed to be some kind of signal fire. Could it be that they've placed such outposts all along the coast to monitor the sea? The composition of the soldiers surrounding them was also unusual. There was a diverse mix of people from Africans and Indians to Europeans, and they were all glaring at them while carrying guns slightly different from what had been seen in Europe. Thump, 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 and a heavy mechanical sound. At the eerie sound of metals brushing and interlocking, people involuntarily turned their gaze. He couldn't help but gape. A beast made of iron. It was big enough to crush a person instantly. While he was dumbfounded seeing the size of the tractor, others were just trembling, saying the devil's chariot had come. They feared they would soon be executed by firing squad. Florida's Coastal Guard immediately disarmed the Spaniards, then lined them up one by one and dragged them somewhere. As he was being dragged away, he looked around again. All those soldiers were wearing unified clothing and marching with identical armament. He had never seen such an army. Everything was bizarre. Equals. Only the main entity had changed from the Virginia Community to the Continental Covenant, and England had withdrawn from the front line. The war between the Covenant and Spain was still ongoing. Especially the Florida Diocese was most seriously concerned about Spanish reinvasion, and as a result, they destroyed various Spanish military strongholds in the vicinity and extremely strengthened coastal security. They placed dozens of surveillance outposts and fortresses, and formed a coast guard in conjunction with the Knights. They established an abbreviated military school benchmarking Virginia's Night School and Mechanical Engineering School, and trained soldiers. As a result, unlike Virginia's military system centered around tractors and knights, Florida maintained thousands of standing troops and focused on monitoring the surroundings. The Continental Congress did not interfere with such coastal security, judging that such ironclad vigilance would help prevent dangerous rumors about Nemo from leaking outside. To maintain such a large standing army, Florida rapidly increased its numbers. They made liberated slaves and remaining Spaniards scattered everywhere into registered population, and quickly embraced and mediated with American tribes, incorporating them into the system. Thus, ethnically diverse soldiers defended Florida's coast, and incidentally blocked the possibility of spies and smugglers. Of course, it was nearly impossible for just a few thousand people to block the entire Florida coast, which was now approaching 2,000 kilometers. In the end, they had no choice but to establish outposts at regular intervals, arm local residents, and improve the information delivery system by installing signal fires for quick response. Most of the Florida government's capabilities were invested in this work. Bishop, the Spaniards discovered on the southern coast, appear to be castaways for now. Then, after detaining them, we must convert them one by one. However, there is one peculiarity. When the aide handed the document to the Bishop of Florida, the bishop's face hardened. There is someone claiming to be a diplomatic envoy from a distant country. I don't know how to read this name. What is his identity? You can read it as Heiskra, and his identity is... Let's report this to the Continental Congress. I am an envoy from Japan who came to meet His Holiness the Pope under my Lord's orders. You cannot treat me like this. Your name is Heiskara Tsunanaga. The man, detained in the same room as missionary Sotelo, shouted. That was the first encounter between the Continental Covenant and the East Asian world to be recorded in history.